becoming one of us. Who's us? The Tomorrow People.
A group of youngsters with special powers are often Earth's only defense against an array of villains, rogue government agencies, aliens, time travelers, shape-shifting robots, balloons, and whatever this is. If you woke up one day hearing voices in your head, you might just need to get your prescription refilled, or perhaps, just perhaps, you're one of the Tomorrow People.
What we are is the next stage of human evolution. We call ourselves the Tomorrow People.
The Tomorrow People, created by Roger Price, was a 1970s British kids science fiction show made by Thames Television as commercial TV's answer to Doctor Who. It was later rebooted twice, once in the 1990s and again with an American-produced version made in Canada. Each reboot reduced the amount of cheese and increased the production values, and we'll look at them in a separate video.
That's a story I'd like to hear.
In this video, we're looking at the 1970s original with all of its charm, its cheese, its cheapness, its changes and its choices.
They can't kill! Those stupid, ill-fated inhibitions they have!
Conceptually, it's what you get if you mixed the X-Men with the Famous Five, with all the resultant horrors that might imply.
You're gonna have to be punished, boy! God'll punish you!
Dad, please!
The Tomorrow People is a relatively modestly budgeted kids program made in a multi-camera television studio with all of the compromises that entails. The series frequently reached for the stars, but without a big enough booster rocket, it can't quite break Earth orbit. It is definitely biting off more than you can chew, the series.
You did it, kids! You did it!
Words do leap out at you while you're watching the Tomorrow People. It's adventurous, it's cheap and cheerful, it's ambitious, sloppy, naive, cozy, childish, a bit amateurish, but a lot of fun.
Must have been some sort of optical illusion.
It's a show that did push some envelopes in some areas, but at times it feels as though somebody's trying to send pumpkin soup in the post.
Weapons sent from beyond the sky.
Even so, it's not hateable. It's always fun to watch, or more accurately, it is jolly fun to watch.
We've just lost our only lead.
When the series was at its best, it's not so bad. And when it was bad, it was really bad. But most of the time it falls into the category of it's good, it's bad, it's good, it's bad, it's silly, it's great, it's tosh, it's not.
What are you talking about?
Kids and teens going through adolescence who suddenly start hearing other people's thoughts aren't necessarily possessed by Satan. They're not even possessed by his less evil but slightly douchier cousin, Devon. Instead, they may actually be displaying the first bloom of telepathic powers.
The Tomorrow People are never alone.
This is the next step in human evolution, known as Homo superior. If they're lucky, a group of similarly powered young people called the Tomorrow People will be on hand to guide these kids through this change. Meanwhile, mere mortals like Ted and Ethel at number 32, people who are common or garden Homo sapiens, were affectionately nicknamed saps by the Tomorrow People.
We're Homo Superior, but we don't like to call ourselves that, so we call ourselves the Tomorrow People.
The lab crew would change almost with the seasons, with a new Tomorrow person being introduced every year or so, with John, Carol, Kenny, Stephen, Elizabeth, Tyso, Mike, Hsu Tai, and Andrew, most of whom had the same haircut and shared powers that would make most kids jealous. They also wore flared trousers and collars that were so wide that in a pinch, the Navy could use them to send messages to the shore.
Silence!
You want what the man said? Shut up!
The Tomorrow People begin the series in their secret lab under a disused underground station in London. They are helped by a computer, Tim, who is their link to the wider galaxy and the Galactic Federation. Earth, at this point, is still listed as a closed world, hence aliens are expressly forbidden from landing on Earth. However, that rarely stops any number of alien villains from setting up shop on Earth, where the Tomorrow People are our planet's main line of defense. There are also some homegrown villains to take care of along the way, but most of the time, they'll be dealing with things like this, and this, and this, and what the hell is that?
I'm sorry, Mrs. Jameson, but I had to show you.
The Tomorrow People cannot kill, but they will use futuristic stun guns to incapacitate a villain. Though, if the villain just happens to fall backwards over a cliff after being stunned, well, that's life. The Tomorrow People each have the power to communicate with each other telepathically. They are able to move things through telekinesis and can teleport themselves over short distances. Teleporting this way is fraught and unreliable, and so the process is usually controlled by Tim using first a belt or later a wristband. Also, because this is a British program from the early 1970s, the teleport process is called jaunting. The Tomorrow People may have advanced mental abilities, but they're otherwise no different physically from any other human, apart from having to wear these giant jaunting belts, which fortunately also help avoid hernias.
Right, we really should have noticed their presence earlier.
The leader of the Tomorrow People was John. He'd broken out on his own as a teen and would later build Tim and the lab with some help from the Galactic Federation.
As Tomorrow People, we have certain duties and responsibilities.
By the time of the series, he's in his late teens and firmly entrenched as the leader of the group, where Nicholas Young played him like a public school prefect who'll give you a slap across the chops if you dared sound vaguely northern, like some sort of common oik.
At least now we know there's soon to be another Tomorrow person.
John is otherwise level-headed and cautious, but also less hip than Darth Maul. In Series 1, first screened in 1973, John would be joined by Carol and Kenny. Kenny's a young East End lad who, as the youngest, mainly minds the lab. Kenny was played by Stephen Salmon, someone who was not actually interested in being an actor, which sure worked out for him.
It's not you he wants, it's us.
Sammi Winmill often plays Carol as though she was appearing in a pantomime version of Tom Brown's School Days aimed at preschool children.
Stephen, it wasn't your fault. Really, it wasn't. It could have happened to any of us.
The first youngster that we'd see breaking out was Stephen, played by Peter Vaughan Clark. The series' introductory story followed him trying to deal with suddenly having telepathic powers when the Tomorrow People do step in to help. But at the same time, there's also this shape-shifting robot Jedediah to deal with.
Idiot!
Jedediah has two human henchmen, bikers Ginge and Lefty, who will soon become friends of the Tomorrow People in the first year, where they will help out, they'll get into trouble, they'll get our heroes out of scrapes, that sort of thing. And then, just like that, they're pretty much forgotten about at the end of the season. The shape-shifting robot Jedediah would return almost immediately, played by both a completely different actor and a redressed fruit machine borrowed from a Teddington pub.
Come on, Tim, don't be a flaming scrum, gasping for a snout, honest.
The third story attempted to show both the end of the pier and the end of the world, with a different alien mining for something that's going to end up blowing up the Earth.
I'm going to enjoy it.
The Tomorrow People would also meet an agent of the Galactic Federation, a group made up of telepaths from various planets. Meanwhile, the makers of the Tomorrow People seem to join the Stock Footage Federation, since filming scenes of widespread devastation was way beyond the show's budget. However, the show would manage to produce its own disasters. The Tomorrow People brought in a director, Paul Bernard, ostensibly because he'd had experience directing special effects on a few Doctor Who serials. But when Roger Price also turned his hand at directing, he quickly saw how the relatively new technology of chroma key could be used to bring the scripts to life.
You're playing a very dangerous game, Spydron.
I want to be sure I haven't missed him.
The first series, with its mix of fantasy and science fiction adventure, does a much better job of staying within the boundary of the achievable rather than later years. Set design of spaceships on the Tomorrow People were often simple but usually quite effective for 70s efforts. However, future series of the Tomorrow People would laugh at any confines of the modest budget and take some larger design risks, some of which seem destined to fail, much like a giraffe with a burning desire to become a limbo champion. Either way, the kids watching at home just didn't seem to mind. The first series of 13 episodes was successful, and the Tomorrow People would return, just not tomorrow, more like, 6 months. Sometime in early 1974.
John, they've got Stephen! They've got Stephen!
But first, a flashback to where it all began. In the 1960s, Roger Price was a young television writer and producer who'd been working for various television companies. While under contract at Granada Television in the early 70s, he'd been working on a pitch for a children's drama about people with telepathic powers, a project he'd apparently mentioned once to rock star David Bowie, who of course would use the phrase homo superior in a song before the Tomorrow People ever made it to air.
I wasn't sure if he was telling the truth, but he must be.
It's slightly arcane and tortuous to go into, but at the time the UK had a system of different companies running the sole commercial outlet in different regions, which would often lead to a piecemeal approach to programming and schedules. Series made by one commercial channel in one region weren't always carried by the other channels, and if they were, there was no guarantee that they would be screened in decent time slots. It would have been a brave producer to make a show for ITV called the 6:35 PM Sunday Night Show, since the chances were high that in some regions it might be screened at 10 AM on every alternate Thursday morning.
So, what are we going to do?
There did at least seem to be a degree of coordination when it came to children's programming.
Most of the children alive today are potential telepaths. All they have to do is find the key within themselves.
Thames Television in London eventually bought the series and paired Roger Price up with a more experienced writer, Brian Finch, who hated the series concept,
Puts you to sleep.
and producer Ruth Boswell. She had created the kids' science fiction series Time Slip, which is a little Tomorrow People-ish, but with scripts that were a little less silly and better suited to that show's budget. Ruth Boswell would produce the first few series and would be replaced briefly by Roger Price before Vic Hughes took over production duties for the rest of the series run.
I thought I told you to stop drinking.
When setting up the Tomorrow People, Roger Price put together outlines for several story ideas, most of which would end up on screen at some point.
Is your family all right? Well, they keep being moved on by the police, but they're okay.
The Tomorrow People was unique for a British series in the 70s. Roger Price insisted that the characters reflect the makeup of Britain, as in not exclusively casting people so pale that they get severe sunburn in the moonlight.
You never know. You might be one of us after all.
There were black actors, there were Asian actors, and when compared to Doctor Who, actual Asian actors played the Asian characters. Some television executives thought that advertisers wouldn't buy ads on a show with a multicultural cast.
You're dismissed.
Price would direct a story here and there, but he would end up writing the vast majority of episodes. The Tomorrow People was his baby, and as he saw it, no one knew it half as well as he did. Even so, Price found himself wanting to wrap up the show after 3 series were made.
Well, here we are again, Professor.
The production of the series was constantly at the mercy of whichever technicians' union was on strike at the time, and there was also the matter of Price's attention being elsewhere. In between series of The Tomorrow People, he would also create children's comedy and variety series. By the time The Tomorrow People wrapped up its original UK run in 1979, Roger Price was already working on projects in North America, with the most famous being the Canadian series You Can't Do That on Television, later to become a huge hit on Nickelodeon.
You're always prepared to see the best in people, aren't you?
With those distractions and the strikes, the Tomorrow People would never settle into a production and broadcast rhythm, with shows made in increasingly smaller batches and shown whenever they were ready. Some episodes would have scenes filmed many months apart, which was not ideal when your younger cast were shooting up in front of the camera.
He hasn't got a spacesuit on, she'll die!
That is correct!
Earlier series had stories running up to 6 episodes, though from the 3rd series, story length would mainly hover around 2 to 3 episodes each. Each had a recap of the previous episode's cliffhanger, and when episodes underran, and they underran frequently, those recaps could get quite lengthy, like when you ask Great Aunt Lara to summarise her trip to the supermarket in less than 20 minutes.
Bye, John! Very well, I will remember. Sandor!
The first year of the Tomorrow People had its ups and its downs, and some more downs, but it did put the show on a solid footing. However, the show would have to evolve with each new series.
Well, we're always on the lookout for new Tomorrow People.
Series 2 began with Kenny and Carol having left to go and join the Galactic Federation. Ginge and Lefty are gone as friendly saps, replaced by Ginger's brother, Chris, who instead of riding a bike has an old Jeep. The recasting was partly due to the actor playing Ginge, Michael Standing, injuring himself before recording, so in came Christopher Chittle. Chris was a lot less thick than his brother, and he was an altogether more useful character. But, as would become tradition on the series, he'd eventually just disappear with nary a mention ever again.
Yes, and you like her too, John. She's a smasher.
The first story of the new season was about an alien manipulating humanity into fighting by assigning everybody either a blue badge or a green one. It starts off in Stephen's class at school, and he soon realises that a new student teacher may also be a tomorrow person.
You can read our minds and we can read yours.
It's a trick, that's all a trick!
Elizabeth has to deal with some quite scary moments of suddenly having these powers at the same time as trying to stop her pupils from killing each other. The original idea for the character was for Elizabeth to be younger, but the role was changed to student-teacher when Elizabeth Adare was cast. She'll join the Tomorrow People as a less patronising counter to John.
Right, into the Skylab, everyone.
The Tomorrow People would travel back in time to ancient Rome to stop future Romans from a parallel timeline who'd also zap back in time to make sure that the Roman Empire would never fall. The Doomsday Men kept the threat homegrown. Stephen goes undercover in a boarding school where the kids are being shaped into future dictators. Their leaders hijack an orbiting weapons platform because there's not much point in having an orbiting weapons platform if it's not going to be hijacked. The special effects of the satellite and spacewalks really do let things down. Never has the word special applied less.
Damocles to space shuttle. You're clear for docking maneuver.
It is an enjoyable premise and story, but very much it's good, it's bad, it's good, it's bad, it's silly, it's great, it's tosh, it's not.
So would you be if you'd just been rescued from space by 3 nuts in a rusty old van?
The second run of episodes saw the series solidify its popularity and made the young cast into big stars in Britain.
To the new tomorrow person.
The third series would introduce Dean Lawrence as the young gypsy boy, Tyso. This series also introduced us to a British government agency that wants to use the Tomorrow People. Colonel Masters wants to study how the Tomorrow People's brains work, which of course is not all that great for said Tomorrow person, or indeed their brain. His scientists have a drug that counteracts the powers of the Tomorrow People, and they've press-ganged Professor Corsten into helping. Corsten would appear a few times as a friend of the Tomorrow People, and in real terms, is a real sap. Masters has an assistant, Trisha, who herself has telepathic abilities, and as it turns out, she'd have become a Tomorrow person had the group existed earlier. Also, spy work tends to not be compatible with the pacifist brain chemistry of a Tomorrow person.
You'd probably lose your special powers, or a conflict inside your head would kill you.
Colonel Masters was easily the series' most effective villain. He's not evil for evil's sake, but it is just one of the perks of the job, like having his own parking space or a company car and an allowance for cleaning the mud off his flared trousers that were trapped in the driver's door of his company car. Trevor Bannister was best known for playing a cheeky London salesman in Are You Being Served, but here his performance is far better than several more respected dramatic character actors.
And we'll really give the KGB and the CIA a run for their money.
The Tomorrow People at this stage even rope in the British Prime Minister as an ally. That is, after they kidnap him, and it's one of those bits that plays well in the moment, but the show never really wants to think how this would actually work in real life.
It seems your friends have brought pressure to bear in high places.
The Kultan are a race of conquerors who will be mentioned from time to time, where they've subjugated this, invaded that, and generally have spread their influence throughout history. They had originally tried to slow human evolution in the past to delay the emergence of the Tomorrow People. On a far-off planet, the Kultan themselves are long gone, but their followers are not yet done making a mess.
An inferiority complex?
More like a persecution mania.
We would meet the first of many clones from the Galactic Federation that were a model for Tim. There were characters like Timus and Techno, which would give Philip Gilbert a chance to appear on camera instead of just giving Tim his voice. At this point, we should mention that the vast majority of adult characters in the Tomorrow People are portrayed as either idiots, fools, buffoons, morons, or a combination of all four, medulla-foons.
Just before Thwaites shot himself.
I did not shoot. Yes, I shot myself, yes.
Villains are often left villainous, if not exactly possessed of the talent to carry out their dastardly schemes, but it's their henchmen and various passers-by who are generally thicker than a timber yard that's next to a competing timber yard, and then the first timber yard is bought out by the second timber yard, creating one super timber yard, which is a lot of planks to be as thick as.
This is serious.
Often these characters are there for comic relief. Comic relief is a term that really needs to be defined better. The third season has a story that is not only infamous for being infamous, but it really does deserve said infamy.
Well, what happened?
He muffed it.
A Man for Emily was about a trio of aliens whose idea of Earth society is based on watching broadcasts of old westerns.
That's a nice looking little planet, the mama.
There's not much I can say, so it's best to just see what it is.
What exactly are we going to be looking for? Well, the Doozlumpin, of course.
Elmer decides he's sick of being a slave and wants to stay on Earth, even after he almost kills someone, while the mama and her daughter Emily are on the hunt for a new man-boy. But it's really their sentient ship that's in control.
Sometimes it does what they ask, but more often it tells them what to do.
Which on its own has decided it might as well just destroy the planet. Most of A Man for Emily is supposed to be funny and amusing, and it sort of is, just not necessarily in the way it was intended.
You won't tickle Emma, will you, Miss Elizabeth?
Peter Davison made his television debut with his then-girlfriend Sandra Dickinson. A Man for Emily has to be seen to be believed. It's something that's just so bad that it's good, but it's really bad, and I just can't look away just in case it gets worse.
Hush your mouth, man boy. He's mine now.
It is more cringe-inducing than a sing-along version of Get Carter.
Ain't you got homes to go to?
The third series ended with Roger Price almost ending the series with The Revenge of Jedediah, which brought back the shape-shifting robot villain who starts off impersonating various people, but then the story really takes off with John and Elizabeth incapacitated and near death, and Jedediah takes over the lab, and it looks like he's won, but then the Galactic Federation just sets everything right.
You tried to kill us.
You wanted to take away our special powers.
The words abrupt and convenient are not enough to describe how anticlimactic this is. It's a bit like newspaper coverage of the eruption of Krakatoa, downplaying the whole thing by saying it was all overblown.
Are there no other brain tests we could try?
The Tomorrow People will leave Earth for a while, and Jedediah will be turned into a beggar. It has a very final feel to it, even if the next run of episodes would follow just a few months later in the same year. Series 3, 4 stories, had 2 comparatively great stories at the top and tail of the series, an okay one, and one truly awful one. I think you can work out which one we're talking about. But the Tomorrow People would return.
It's no joke having your body's electrons torn apart and transmitted halfway across the galaxy at 1,000,000 times the speed of light.
As we mentioned, Roger Price also produced several youth-based comedy variety shows. Price, who'd seen how shows like the Tomorrow People didn't really appeal to girls, recognised the drummer in the teenage house band of one of his shows as having the potential to be a heartthrob addition to the Tomorrow People. In the 4th run of episodes, Mike Holloway joined the series as East End tearaway Mike.
Well, I don't think we'll be troubled by your 2 friends again.
When we first meet him, he's already quite confident with his powers, using them to play tricks on people and open locks. So yeah, he's a little bit whoa, a little bit whoa, a little bit shh, shh, shh. He's a geezer.
Well, if you're not one of them, what are you?
I wish I did know what I was, Mr. O'Reilly.
Mike is a cheeky, cocky cockney. He's headstrong and doesn't listen to anyone. His introductory story has him using his powers in a not entirely Tomorrow Person-like way. The shorter 4th season had one of the few stories not written by Roger Price, but he would direct the interminably dull Into the Unknown.
Yeah, look at that.
A space adventure serial guest starring Jeffrey Balden that, while it technically is set in space, has about as much adventure as a theme park that's been demolished and replaced by a block of apartments. Poor Tyso virtually disappeared after Dean Lawrence had changed agents and the production couldn't get in touch with them about his availability. Stephen would also just quietly slip away without much mention. In fact, throughout all 8 series of the show, no one leaving the series ever gets to say goodbye. One day, they're just suddenly not there, like that last fish finger when your back was turned. Some of the characters' disappearance were at least addressed in dialogue, but most of the time, it was adios, mañana persona.
It's lava! Steam! It's lava!
I do subscribe to the fan theory that disappearing characters were accidentally jaunted into shark-infested waters after insulting Tim's cooking.
Haggis!
I swear I used to work at an office like that. People used to be called into a little room for a friendly chat with Karen from HR, and then boom, you'd never hear from them again. So either Karen was from Human Resources, or she was a vampire, or a combination of the two known as a Human Resources Manager.
I'll pull the other one, it's got bells on.
The other one?
With Tyso and Stephen off taking swimming lessons, from the 5th season, it seemed to be all about Mike.
Oh, too right, darling.
The Russians are chasing after a young girl, Pavla, who has powers similar to the Tomorrow People. The lab is raided by British government agents investigating whether the Tomorrow People have anything to do with the missing Russian girl. Of course they don't, but then they do when Mike meets Pavla and the two get along like a house on fire. This is despite pyrokinesis not being an observable Tomorrow Person power. The Dirtiest Business was part Cold War spy caper, part love story between Mike and Pavla. It is the hardest hitting story where, apart from a few areas of poor plotting, it's quite chilling. The Tomorrow People go looking for Pavla. One street kid even suggests prostitution as an option, and the whole story ends with easily the darkest images of any British kids television series of the 70s. Even darker than that banned episode of The Magic Roundabout where Zebedee impaled Dougal.
Every important KGB agent has a small explosive device surgically inserted in their bodies.
Pavla jumps out of a window to save Mike and... holy shit!
I told them, didn't I? That's why they killed her.
This is followed by another trite space adventure with an evil alien race.
In this confined space, it could kill us all. That might not be such a bad idea.
And then finally we have a story where a professor uses an ancient drum and Mike's pop band to take over the minds of the country's youth.
It was me that killed her.
For some reason, I always had this ambivalent attitude towards the character of Mike Bell. But conversely, Mike Holloway was quite good in the role. He's believable, not super posh like some of the other teeps, though often dialogue scenes between Mike and John sound like a debate between a lord and his chauffeur over whether the roller will take E10.
Just curious, that's all.
The Tomorrow People's living arrangement is rather fluid. Some still live at home and others will reside in a cabin in the lab. Either way, personal space is at a premium when somebody can just jaunt in on you on any moment.
I think she saw me halfway through a jaunt.
Even worse, with everybody being telepaths, there's just no blaming an errant fart on the dog.
Whichever way you look at it, it's vital that no one finds out.
In 1978, we were blessed, if that's what you want to call it, with not just one, but 2 short seasons of the Tomorrow People, originally shown just a few months apart.
I'm in some sort of temple. They think I'm the god Kishnu.
Elizabeth Adare took time off to have a baby, and for the show's 6th series, we were introduced to Hsu Tai, a woman worshipped as a goddess by a Tibetan sect. She manages to make contact with Mike while he's in a glider, mistaking him for a god, which did Mike's ego no harm.
I feel a right bug.
right up until Hsu Tai, Mike and John are going to be sacrificed by being burned alive.
It is the most upsetting thing that you ask.
Misako Koba, it's not a stretch to say, is not a particularly strong actress, but she was at the time singing in cabarets. This is probably why Hsu Tai's finest moment in the series was when Koba sang on screen in Japanese.
I'm a tomorrow person now too.
Her accent when speaking English is often as thick and impenetrable as mine is. Struth! Have a cigar, you galah. Wake up, Australia.
Can't we, Thing? When the thick ship is far enough away not to pick us up in its scanner.
I'll come back to the middle story, but the last story of Series 6 was a story with the Thargons.
Here we are, we're in a fix.
An Earth-based dictator.
Let's try it out now.
And a robot called Thing.
Strap yourselves in!
The Tomorrow People has many candidates for the very worst, and then insert something like sets, special effects, costumes, scripts, models, etc. But Thing has to be the most ridiculous example of, well, it's for kids, it'll do.
There's more than a chance the thick ship saw it!
It's a glove puppet voiced by David Graham, though he sounds like he's John Oliver's granddad. And even worse, there's another robo-puppet Thing that's just as bad.
No one will get hurt!
But if we back up to the middle story of this run, it was the best. Hitler's Last Secret starts off with Mike joining in on the fad of British kids dressing up in Nazi gear. Mike is going full Gestapo in a trend best described as Gestupido, where he busts out the loser high fives and hailing all manner of Hitlering. Meanwhile, in a bunker in Germany, the real Thing is still around, and by the real thing we mean the real thing. Hitler's back and he's got OG Hitler youth who look like kids because of Nazi research. AH intends to use television to take over the kids. But Hitler is not an unfulfilled Austrian painted turned psychotic bitch boy, but an alien who turns into a literal pile of goo if you stop listening. It is a good story, it's a little trite in places, where it's clear that Roger Price swapped out punk fashions for Nazi fashions, but it is vaguely amusing to see young Rodney Trotter as a middle-aged member of the Hitler Youth. This was one of the many times that actor Michael Sheard would end up playing Adolf Hitler. Somebody was obviously interrupted while shaving, and the winner of World War II's wooden spoon.
He's even a human being. He's a monster from another world.
Being a Tomorrow person with all of the abilities is a great lark, but in order for there to be some jeopardy, the scripts would often have to find a way to nobble their powers. So very quickly we're introduced to headbands that restrict their powers, or energy fields that restrict their powers, or minerals, or laser beams, or interference from this or that. And when you couldn't find a way to nerf a Teep's powers, possession would become a popular plot development, with Tomorrow People being taken over by pop music, ugly fashions, or even history's biggest AH.
Andrew, I'm feared for you. This is the devil's work.
The last new Tomorrow person was young Andrew Forbes, who'd been using his new powers to make ghosts appear to tourists to help his father's hotel stay in business. This is despite his dad trying to lock him up because he was so God-fearing that anything freaked him out, even a draft. Nigel Rhodes was one of the youngest Tomorrow People, but he was a solid child actor, something that wasn't always considered when casting for the show. Andrew starts off with manifesting ghosts and then goes on to make Nessie researchers see the Loch Ness Monster. I don't know about actual Nessie, but when I visited actual Loch Ness, I did see this, the Mock Ness Monster. Andrew joins the Tomorrow People, but is somehow still allowed to keep making ghosts for his father's hotel. Then two aliens looking for a telepathic power-blocking mineral show up, and of course, all manner of wackiness ensues. It's both a little funny and a little cringeworthy, just like my ponytail.
Oh, that is good news.
The aliens have hired Glip as a pilot, a character from the planet of the koala bears, and he has a pretty natty perm.
Not that that'll impress you, I know.
Hsu Tai sings and you can see why she was cast. She really should have just been singing all of her dialogue in Japanese with subtitles. The final story of the 7th series, The Living Skins, is another one of those it's good, it's bad, it's good, it's bad, it's silly, it's great, it's tosh, it's not stories.
And begin the hunt!
Parts of it are also retreading Hitler's Last Secret, but again, I liked it. The latest fad is wearing bubble skin jumpsuits, except as soon as you start wearing them, the suits take over your personality.
Those suits you got on, they're alive.
There are some great and creepy scenes of Mike and Hsu Tai clearly under the influence of something, but then it gets really silly because we keep cutting back to the shop selling these things and the human agent of the aliens.
Many people are buying bubble skin clothes.
Good.
Who speaks in a way that is so obviously creepy that you can't help but call the cops on him, and the aliens themselves are balloons. Oh dear. But that's not the oh dearest. The aliens are called Ballboids. Honestly, that calls for something much stronger than oh dear. Oh bother.
Hey, look out!
The final series was just one 4-part story, which was the shortest series but longest story for many years.
I wonder how she and her peacemaking mission getting on.
War of the Empires is, well, it's an epic story of intergalactic war, the Galactic Federation mired in protocol, and the Tomorrow people just behaving oddly. The Thargons are back, again having overdone the Bronzer, and they face off against their mortal enemies, and of course I must prepare you for the full enormity of the Sorsons.
It was a brilliant victory, a great triumph.
The Galactic Federation are incapable of action, possibly because they're crippled by embarrassment. No, wait, that's me. And then there's the American president, wanting to use the Sorsons to gain access to alien technology. He'll use a... Wait, that's a toy gun that fires ping-pong balls, isn't it?
Get out of the way, or you might get hurt.
The Tomorrow people themselves are acting really differently. In the series, the Galactic Trig or the Federation have often been venerated. The Teeps look up to them, happily took on missions for them. And now, all of a sudden, John and Mike in particular are incredibly cynical and nihilistic about the Federation and its inaction.
Look, we all know the Galactic Federation is nothing much more than a useless talking shop.
Not only that, they're just very fatalistic about death. Ships are destroyed and beings are killed.
They did bring it on themselves.
Yeah, I suppose that's true.
Andrew finally gets to go on a mission where he puts on an American accent to fool the president so he can rescue Six Hsu Tai and Mike. Dude, you should have just given him your under-11s football trophy. War of the Empires ends with the Teeps working together to generate a fake war fleet to scare off the remaining aliens, though it's only really a temporary pause in the danger to Earth rather than any permanent solution. The story had to be made in a rush, and even if it wasn't necessarily wrapping anything up, it did at least provide a big end to the series. It wasn't meant to end the series, as at least one more story had been written and planned, but scuppered due to various factors, including industrial action.
Yes, those poor saps hoping to hear voices from the stars are about in the same position as someone with an old-fashioned wireless set.
However, it was probably not a bad time to end the series, since Roger Price was by then setting up shop across the Atlantic.
I mean, you sit in here all snug and comfortable, congratulating yourselves about your special powers and your guarantee of immortality.
There were tie-in comics, novels, and much later on audio plays. And while the Tomorrow people had a huge audience at the time, the series in general would fade away from the public consciousness for quite a while until people remembered just how much they enjoyed it and clamoured for its return.
I just do not like the idea.
The Tomorrow people, despite its status as a kids show, did aim for some sort of scientific accuracy by involving computer scientist and author Dr. Christopher Evans as an advisor.
I am a biotronic computer. I consist of living fluids, and I am capable of original thought.
There are times when the Tomorrow people goes into detail explaining certain concepts to make plot developments sound at least partially plausible. I completely sympathise, since I've got a mechanic who helps make my old rusted out shitbox seem vaguely roadworthy.
Flying down a chute, the middle of a flipping earthquake, and then a punch up with two geezers wearing tin hats and carrying water pistols.
The Tomorrow people could have flashes of brilliance, moments of mature storytelling, and some clever plot devices, but often these flashes would be overwhelmed by stories with terrible internal logic, incredibly simplistic story resolutions, and woefully inadequate production values. It is a show that can't make its mind up whether it wants to be a camp comedy or a serious drama, and so it settles on seriously camp.
I hope he believes me.
Of course he'll believe you, Thing.
A lot of the reasons for these problems are lost to time. Some of them are just related to the budget, or related to industrial action, or that's just what they came up with. But you know, we are not reviewing this as a 6-year-old in 1975. Unless, of course, it's the 6-year-old time-travelling supervillain, Moller Vox.
And the situation is getting very serious.
Some of you might be asking, if it's so pants, why did I keep watching? I can't look away.
We have travelled through the worst part.
There are special effects in the Tomorrow people that were ahead of what the BBC was doing around the same time. But that's only some of the time. By and large, the Tomorrow people will make some of Doctor Who's poorest special effects seem like something ILM would eventually win an Oscar for.
Now you will pay for what you have done.
All too often, the Tomorrow people makes do with, that'll do, the pub's open in half an hour. It's not necessarily laziness or incompetence on the part of the program makers, just the time and the money was spread so thinly that you'd need a microscope to see a budget breakdown.
Very sophisticated piece of apparatus.
Chroma key lets you do lots of things that you couldn't do otherwise, but it's really only a time saver and a money saver if you do it properly. When it's not done properly, it looks like this.
Looks pretty makeshift to me.
While putting together this video, it became apparent to me that where the series really would struggle almost every single time was whenever it left Earth. Because if you wanted a really good laugh, you put the heroes in silver spacesuits and then chroma keyed them against model spaceships.
It's difficult to see.
Whereas Doctor Who had access to the massive BBC departments for costumes, props, visual effects, etc., the Tomorrow People was made at Thames' more modest facilities in Teddington. The Tomorrow People did at least make life easier on its cast and crew by being recorded a scene at a time and then edited together later, as opposed to trying to line up everything and record an entire episode in one 90-minute session. The commercial upstart would occasionally show its public service rival a trick or two, and then it would proceed to lose all that goodwill in the very next scene.
If you're prepared to take the risk...
Yes, we'll take the risk.
The bulk of the music featured in the series was taken from music libraries, sometimes known as stock music, though the Tomorrow People theme, along with variations and a few musical cues, was created specifically for the show by UK-based Australian composer Dudley Simpson. He would provide most of the background music in Doctor Who throughout the 70s and would later write music for Blake 7. The show's fast-paced title sequence would change as new Tomorrow People joined the series, and it is one of the most memorable elements of the series. And by memorable, I mean it's memorable in a mostly positive way without qualification. Apart from the potential for motion sickness. If you excuse me, I think I might be ill.
Look, they've reappeared near to the Slim ship.
Right, if that's the way they want it.
No!
The Tomorrow People was very popular in the 1970s, popular enough for two reboots, a British reboot that ran in the early to mid-90s, and a more young adult version made in Canada with US money for the CW network in the 2010s. We will look at those another time.
A brilliant triumph!
The original concept of the series was that any child could potentially be a Tomorrow person. So, like any show, the Tomorrow People would live or die based on its casting. Because when you build a premise around young people, you do need to find some good child actors, which, truth be told, was often easier said than done. Though of course, if you were a kid and you couldn't be an actual Tomorrow person, I do suppose the next best thing would be actually appearing on the Tomorrow People. Or possibly when you're a bit older, Charlie's Angels.
Or I will kill the child slaves.
Being cast on the Tomorrow People didn't really lead to bigger and better things for any of the main cast. For a series with so many roles for kids, the production had a good relationship with drama schools, leading to future Birds of a Feather stars Linda Robson and Pauline Quirk appearing in one story, as well as Nicholas Lyndhurst from Only Fools and Horses and Goodnight Sweetheart in another story.
You're not going to leave me here to die after all I've done to help you?
Yes, Fluffy, we are.
Well used the Stam Fine scale to pass out the quality of episodes, with the worst stories at one end, and at the other end, it's all of the it's good, it's bad, it's good, it's bad, it's silly, it's great, it's tosh, it's not stories.
It just doesn't make sense.
The worst is easy. We'll start with A Man for Emily, which, much like this channel, is just trite and unfunny. Into the Unknown also gets a mention for just being so dull. At the other end, we have the introductory story, The Slaves of Jedekiah, The Blue and the Green, The Doomsday Men, Secret Weapon, The Revenge of Jedekiah, The Dirtiest Business, Hitler's Last Secret, and The Living Skins. The final story, War of the Empires, gets a special mention for being solid, but it was just too much for what the show's budget could comfortably realise.
Well, they haven't got the resources.
This was a show from my childhood, but as I got older, I would engage with the Tomorrow People less and less. Probably because it just wasn't repeated as often in the 80s where I lived, compared to the likes of Doctor Who or Thunderbirds. It would become a thing that I would watch every now and then, but that every now and then would become something like 10 to 15 years between viewings. So the production issues would become more glaring the older that I got. Are they actually worse than other shows of the era? At times, honestly, yes, but that just probably adds another layer of fun, for me at least, on top of what they were originally going for.
Tell them the truth, I think you're mad.
Your enjoyment of the 70s version of the Tomorrow People would probably depend on a number of factors, but basically a pre-existing attachment to the show is almost mandatory. If you're into 70s British science fiction, then you'll probably have a good time. That is the important thing. For all of the bits that we found lacking, and we found lots of things lacking, the Tomorrow People is still a hell of a lot of fun to watch. It's sort of a really stylized time capsule.
If he takes the time key and leaves us with these bands round our heads, we could be trapped in the spaceship, well, perhaps forever.
We don't normally give numbers out of 10 as a score, but for this video only, here's a review score, but it's only for the telepaths out there. So, I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 10. Oh, jeez, just burst a blood vessel.
Well, they'll suffer for it this time. How funny.
The Tomorrow People is totally an example of it's good, it's bad, it's cheap, it's cheesy, it's silly, it's serious, it's exciting, it's embarrassing, it's ambitious, and its special effects can often feel like a pre-visualization animatic for a bigger budgeted movie.
They'll be back.
but it's still fun. So the question is, are you tomorrow enough for the tomorrow people? If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.